Welcome back to Animation Teacher. Today I'm excited to launch a brand new set of series for animation in Toon Boom Harmony. This series is geared towards my first year students, and it's an introduction to Toon Boom Harmony. So the first thing we'll do is launch our software. Now you'll notice that it's called Toon Boom Harmony Premium. Now this basically means it's Toon Boom Harmony 14. So the first thing we'll have to do is create a new project. I'm going to call this project User Interface Intro. And usually for the location, I like to save it at a place where I keep all my Harmony projects. But for today's demonstration purposes, I'm just going to save it on the desktop. So we'll keep the camera size at default here at full HD at 24 frames per second. So when you create a project folder, it's going to appear where you designate it. So in this case, I just set it to the desktop. If we go inside the folder, you'll see we have 4 default folders. Now, the first thing you have to do when you actually start your Harmony project is you have to save the file. So, File, Save. Once you do that, you'll see that you'll get a palettes list, a few other auxiliary files, and our main XStage file. Now, this is basically a launch file for your project. Your project will not work if you don't have all these supplementary folders plus your launch file. So please, when you're submitting stuff, never just give the launch file, otherwise it won't work because it needs to refer to these. Alright, so here we go. Welcome to Toon Boom Harmony Premium, or 14. So the first thing you'll notice is if you guys opened Harmony before, this is a more grayed out layout. It's a little more slick than what you're used to if you used Harmony 10. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to go over is this workspace. We're going to be concentrating mostly on animation, so I'm going to set it to animating. Now, your default workspace should look something like this. You can adjust it as needed. I like to have a bigger camera space. So you'll notice a few things on here that could be a little overwhelming. So let's just go over this one chunk at a time. So on the left here, we have our tool sets here. We have our timeline view. We have our camera view, our library, and our node view. These are the main windows that you guys will be using. So let's go over some of the tools here. So if you used Photoshop or any graphic software editing or creation software, they tend to use the same sets of tools. So our first set here is the selection tool. This has something called a cutter. I'll show you what these additional options mean, but basically I want to show you the main tools. So this is the contour editor, and again we have several other options, sub options. We have our brush tool, we have our pencil tool, we have our text tool, we have an eraser, a paint bucket, we have our line tool. In the line tool we have additional shapes. Actually, in our bucket tool we have additional bucket paints as well. We have our eyedropper. We have our anchor. Now we'll get into this a little later. It's called a drawing pivot tool. This is called a morph tool. We'll get into that later. This is the hand tool, just to move around your camera. This is the animate tool. It's not what you think it is. I'll explain what that does later. And this is the transform tool. Basically, I keep it at the transform tool almost exclusively just because it does so many things. And here is our inverse kinematic tools. We'll explain you that at a later date. And this is our onion skin tool, which we can turn both of those off. Okay. Next, we have our timeline. Timeline works like this. We basically have all your drawings stacked up in a hierarchy. The higher above it is, the more in the foreground or the front it will be. On the right hand side here we have what's called a timeline. And if you used any editing software, you'll note that it always goes left to right, and above here it'll show you your frames. So we're at frame 1 and now we're at frame 60. Below here we have our camera view. So basically anything inside this box you'll get to see in the render view once you render your project out. Anything outside here, and you can hit 1 to zoom out, 2 to zoom in. That's a handy shortcut. Anything out here is what I call the graveyard, where you can put stuff so you make sure it's not being rendered out. Over here is our library. Basically anything you create on a drawing peg, for example, gets put into a library here. So let's just go to frame 1 and I'll just draw something here. So right now you'll see that I've drawn something on the library. It's being exposed on my timeline here, and you see it on the camera. So whatever it is that you draw gets shown up here in your drawing substitution preview. Above here is basically a node view. This used to be called the network view, but now they're just node views. As a default, you'll get a write module, a display, a composite, and usually a drawing symbol. Now the write module basically tells you where it's going to be rendered out. So where your movie will be eventually rendered out to. Your display module basically will display anything connected to it. So right now everything in the composite is connected to it. We'll get more into modules later on as we go along. What's important to note is each of these windows are just the main default that come along with the animating workspace. You can add windows like this drawing window by clicking this plus sign and pulling it up, and you'll get different windows. Another great window to have is something called tool properties. So if you pull up your tool properties window and select a tool, it will give you various options of that tool. For example, the text tool will give you options of the font. The paint bucket tool will give you a myriad of options, which I can explain further to you later on. And the brush, pencil tool, so forth and so on. The other thing you can do in addition to adding new windows is you can add options to and different views to your windows. So Harmony works with various layers, which we'll explain to you later on. But you can activate those layers by right-clicking this window and hitting Art Layer. And you can see that each of these are separated. This is an overlay layer, this is line art, this is color art, and underlay art. In the timeline view, if you right-click, you can actually display the playback. So in the playback, you can basically hit play and the time will run on the timeline here. You can toggle audio on and off. This is to scrub. This is just to play back the audio. And you'll see the frame length here, the start and the stop. The start and the stop basically means where you want to stop the playback. So if your frame is 60 frames long but you want to stop it at 30, you hit stop and it'll bracket that out and it'll just play up to frame 30. To reset that back, you can just go right to the end and hit stop, and then that'll stop at the last frame. This is your frame rate. Now up here we have a variety of default tools. So here's your save tool. This is the undo There's a cutting tool. These are rigging tools. We'll get to this at a more advanced stage, so you can ignore that for now. This display module, which is essentially this thing here. I'll show you more options for that later. And these are different tools for your pegs, which I'll explain later on. So for now, you can ignore all this up here. What I want you guys to concentrate on for now is the camera view, the timeline view. You can have a quick look at this node view and the library. So basically, these are the views that you should be comfortable with. Again, you can add more views like so and more options, but until you know what they do, I would just keep it as clean as you can. Now the next thing you want to do is set up your preferences. So I want you guys to go to Edit, Preferences, and there are a few things here that I highly recommend that you change. You'll start to discover more things that you would want to do as you go. For now, under the shortcuts, we don't want to touch anything because I want you guys to learn the default shortcuts of Harmony. And you can see them all listed here, and they're all set to default. So the first thing we need you guys to change is under the General tab. I want you guys to click on Focus on Mouse Enter. And I want you guys to set the levels of undo to 200 or 250. I like it at 250, but some people like it less. The other thing I want you to mark off is stop motion keyframes. This will basically allow you to keyframe without automatically adding an in-between, which can get a little annoying later on. And this here is optional. If you want to auto-save, depending on your work habits, you might want to set this to enable, and you can set it to ask before saving as well. So you can kind of cancel that every 20 minutes. It's useful to save you time if you find your system crashing or you're one of those people who just simply lose work. And it happens. Camera view. We can leave this for now. We're going to go over to drawing, and I want you to set your onion skin render style to normal. I think it's set to enable shade, but just set it to normal. The onion skin in this mode looks way better. The next thing I want you to have a look at is the Advanced tab, and I want you to set Support Overlay Underlay Arts. If that's turned off, you're only going to see the line art and the color art. So I want to make sure that that's on so we see all 4 layers. And that's it. So we'll hit OK, and now you have your settings. Now the focus on mouse enter basically allows you to hover over these workspaces and have a red bounding box like so, highlighting it. This is important because there's a shortcut where you can center on your selection by hitting O. For example, if I clicked on my art here, like so, and I wanted to locate it here in my node view, but it's way over here, I can just simply hover over this node view and hit O, and it'll locate what I have selected in my camera view. And similarly, it'll do the same in your timeline as well. It's hard to be able to tell at this point because there's only one drawing. So anyway, that is the user interface. I think the next thing we'll do is we'll go more in depth with the tools. But for now, once you have all that, I want you to just hit File Save, and we're just going to close this. Okay, so that's our first user interface introduction. Thanks for watching.